sector. And so I decided to make that transition from the high-tech industry into agriculture. And that's where I found Dr-Elaine-Ingham and the Soil Food Web School. So I went through, did my training, became a certified consultant, and then I cut my ties with my IT world, and I haven't looked back since. It's been a fantastic journey to get into, working with large scale and small scale producers and really getting them to understand soil biology and how we can transition them from a conventional or organic system to biological farming. And it really has been a life passion, and it's just extraordinarily fulfilling for me. So we're going to hear from some other panelists today, and let me just do a quick introduction of some of the panelists. So we have Dr. Elaine-Ingham. She needs no really introduction. I mean, everybody here is here because of her. But we are going to hear from Dr. Elaine. She's going to give us a quick introduction for herself, and then also talk a little bit about her history. And then Renald Flores, who owns Flores Systems, and he is a soil food web consultant. And in fact, he's going to be going through a presentation about a project that he was working on to give you an idea about some of the work that we actually do. And then we have Kiesha Wheeler and Casey Ernst. They own Catalyst Bioamendments. They also are soil food web consultants, and they own a really great composting company. And I'm lucky enough to live close to them because a lot of my clients actually purchase their compost. So it's great to have somebody local that I can rely upon to get good compost. And then Wes Sanders, he owns Foothill Biological, and he is also next to us as well. And it's great to have a bunch of resources in our local area. And Wes owns a lab, so he'll be able to answer a lot of questions about the Launch Your Lab program and what it is to be a CLP, certified lab practitioner. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Soil Food Web training program. So it really starts with the foundation courses. And the foundation courses are where we learn the science and the theory behind the Soil Food Web and the practices that we employ. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of, what's involved with foundation courses, but some people, they just want the education and they stop there. That's it for them. They just want to get that knowledge. Others are looking for more of a career path. And so you really have two ways you can go. You can go down the certified lab tech path, which you'll be able to stand up and have your own certified soil food web lab where you can get samples from customers and do soil assessments and then be able to provide reports back to them. And some folks that go down that track, run their own lab, certified lab, will just stay there, and that's what they want. They want to be able to run their own lab, and others decide that they'll move into them becoming a consultant and going through the consultant's training program. You can also go directly into the consultant's training program, which you'll get all the knowledge about the certified lab program and be able to run your own lab as a certified consultant. But really, there's a multiple career paths here as well. As a consultant, you can, again, like I said, do your lab work. You can also become a consultant, somebody who's going to be a trusted advisor to your clients to help them through that process of transitioning from their current growing systems into biological farming. And then we also have a very definite need for people to produce biologically complete compost. This is compost that we will use. These are our tools that we use to help our farmers and our parks and rec and residential yards transition themselves from, again, those conventional systems to the biological systems. And so you can go down that route of actually creating good biologically complete compost and selling that retailly. Okay, so let's talk about the Launch Your Lab offer. So this is available for January 2021, and this is going to be the last time we're going to offer it at this discounted price. And really what the offer is about is the combination of the foundation courses and the certified lab tech program. Typically, those two things retail for $6,000. We're offering it for $3,600, so it's a savings of $2,400 overall. And then if you want to later on add into the consultant's training program, that's an additional $3,000. So again, fantastic offer that we're running. And again, this will be the last time we run it at this discounted price, and it's available through January 2021. So what are the benefits of the CLP? Well, you've taken the foundation classes, so you've got the basic knowledge, and that's the science and the theory behind it. But what the Certified Lab Tech program offers you is become a certified lab. so that you can stand up your own business to be able to start taking samples from clients and be able to generate reports and so forth. Myself as a consultant, I will either do the lab work myself, or I'll refer it to other labs if my workload's too high, or if it's in areas that are, some of my clients are quite a ways away from me. I'll have them send their samples off to a lab that's close to where my client is actually at. So it's really good to be able to run your own business. And this is something you can actually do from home. I have my own lab, and it is here at my house. I have just designated a room. And when you go through the certified lab program, you get to learn what equipment do you need. And it's typically wrapped around a microscope and a camera and all the associated lab equipment. And you could do it in a relatively small space. It's not like you have to have a massive building with a whole bunch of really expensive equipment to be able to do the work that we do. Okay, so let's talk about the foundation courses. So again, this is where we learn the science and the theory. And if you go through the lab practitioners, or you're going to become a certified consultant, it's a requirement for all of us to go through this first. And we've broken down the foundation courses into 4 foundation courses. The first one is around Introduction to the Soil Food Web. And so this is really kind of the largest of the courses. And it's to talk about what is soil versus dirt, what is the soil food web, and what makes up the soil food web, all the constituent parts, and how do those interactions actually work. And we'll talk about the different microorganisms. So what is the role of bacteria and fungi and protozoa and nematodes and microarthropods and arthropods, all the way through that system. And so once you get a good idea of how the soil food web works and what the microorganisms are, then we also start talking about what are some of the different case studies. And it's not just relegated down to agriculture. I mean, a lot of these case studies show that we can apply these systems into agriculture, small scale, large scale, parks and rec. You get into residential yards. So really anywhere where people are growing plants, these principles can apply. All right, so you've learned now in Foundation Course 1 about the soil food web. And now we move on to what are some of the practical applications, or how do we actually do this work? So the first thing is around biocomplete compost. And we make a distinction about biocomplete versus non-biocomplete, because not all composts are created equal. It's really the microorganisms that we're very interested in. And so we'll teach you the different ways to make biologically complete compost that you now can then use to do these practices. So we'll talk about the history of compost, how to make biocomplete compost both on a small scale and a large scale, and then what are the different ways that you would apply this compost. And then we move to foundation course number 3, which is taking or making biocomplete extracts and teas. And really that starts with using biocomplete compost. And how do we now transform that into a liquid amendment? So we'll talk about what is an extract, what is a tea, what's the difference between those two things, and why you would use them versus another. And then we'll talk about how to actually produce those products. And then what are the application methods? Are we talking about spraying it? Are we doing soil drenches? Are we using it through irrigation systems or deep root zone injections and things like that? And then we move to foundation course number 4, which is microscopy. And the microscope is one of our most important tools. Think of it as, when you go through this, you essentially become a farmer of microorganisms. The life in the soil is what we're very interested in about. But imagine if you were a cattle rancher and you were never able to see your cattle, never saw how they interacted, how they lived, how they actually, existed in that ecosystem. It'd be very hard to actually manage cattle. And the same aspect here, we want to be able to look at the biology that we see in the soils. And so the microscope is a very important tool for us. Now, a lot of people kind of get nervous because you may have never been exposed to using a microscope, and it seems very daunting. But we take the time to really make sure you understand what is the microscope, what are all the different constituent parts of a microscope, how to tune your microscope so that we get the best viewing possible. So we spend a lot of time kind of breaking that down and making it very accessible for folks. And now once you know how to use a microscope, we get into the biological morphology. How do you identify different types of fungi? What are the different protists that are in there? An amoeba versus a flagellate versus a ciliate, looking at the different nematodes. And so we do a lot of our assessments by looking at the types of organisms that are in that sample. Now that you've done that sample, we have all this data. Now we have to interpret it. What does it all mean? When you start seeing certain organisms versus other organisms, are we talking about aerobic or anaerobic conditions? So by the time you get through course number 4, you've read about the science and the theory, the practical application methods of making compost and liquid amendments, and then how to use one of the biggest tools we have, which is a microscope. And that sets you up for the future programs that you might get into, which is the Certified Lab Tech program. So that's what this offer is really about. But the Certified Lab Tech program works like this. You get assigned a mentor. You have one-on-one microscope training. So you have 8 hours that you're going to work with a mentor to make sure that you understand how to use a microscope, how to do the identifications, how to actually do the practices of making proper dilutions and spraying the sample on your slide correctly and things like that. And once you've gone through all the coursework and the one-on-one training with your mentor, we get into a certification program, because we want to make sure that there's consistency amongst all the labs. It's very frustrating if you were to send one sample to one lab and send the same sample to another lab and you got wildly different results. And so our goal is to make sure that there's consistency amongst the labs that are doing this work. And the certification is our tool to be able to make sure that you've got the necessary skills before you become an actually certified lab. Then we also provide you with quite a bit of information too in the Launch Your Life guidebook. And this really helps you stand up your business, make sure you have all the right equipment and good things like that. And then there's a referral network. So once you've gone through and you become certified, now you're posted on the website. And I could tell you that I've actually got quite a few referrals just going from the website. Folks that are looking for people to help them do this work will look at the website and say, oh, here's a consultant or here's a lab near me, and be able to reach out. So having the referral network is really important to help drive your business. So the timeframes around this. So the foundation courses and the CLP could be completed in 6 weeks if you just worked full time. I mean, if you dedicated your time to doing this work, you could really go through that fast through that. But we know that a lot of people don't have that kind of time to dedicate that intensively for that short period of time. And so we really allow for you to have up to 12 months to finish the foundation courses and 3 months to finish your certified lab program. So, you can kind of really go at your pace, whatever makes sense for you. And I know probably the number of people that are going to do this are going to be working in other jobs and so forth. So you need that additional time. And there's also equipment that you'll need to be able to purchase. So that's a microscope and a camera, test tube, slides, things like that. You should budget right around $450, $900 for the lab, for the equipment that you'll need for your lab. And then lastly is around the CTP. And so if you decide to go down that track, this is where we train you to become a consultant, that trusted advisor to your clients. And the way we've broken this up is into 3 stages. You have stage 1, which is the BioComplete compost section. So remember, we talked about compost as being one of our major tools that we use, and it's around the organisms. So we need to talk about how can you make good biologically complete compost. And again, you're working with a mentor with this as well. So the mentor will help guide you through the process of making sure that you got the recipes correctly. Are you turning right? Are you, applying the right moisture to your piles and so forth? Once you've proven that you can actually make good biocomplete compost, then we move to stage 2, which is making the biocomplete liquids. So this is making extracts and teas. So you've made that good compost. Now let's make that really good liquid amendments. And once you've been able to prove that you can make those liquid amendments, we get into stage 3, which is a final project. And that is where you work with your mentor to define some project that you're going to work with to show that you can apply these practices with success. And so you'll have a control where you're maybe using the same practices that aren't biological. And now you have a biological plot that you're going to actually show that you're going to apply the right biology to those plants. And then you're going to look at the differences between those, where this comparative aspect to that final project. And really the goal with this is to simulate as if you were doing this for a client. So you're doing your microscope assessments, you're taking the data, you're interpreting the data, you're coming up with the right conclusions, and the mentor is helping you through that process. At the end of the day, once you finish this final project, you should then feel very confident that you can take these things and repeat them with your clients that you're now going to gain. Okay, so that is the different programs that we have in the offer. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and hand this over to Dr. Elaine-Ingham. So she needs a little introduction, but Elaine, I'll let you go ahead and talk about your history and who you are and all that good stuff. So Elaine, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That was a nice, succinct explanation of the programs that we're offering at the school. So you can come and learn to do all of these assessments of the biology in your soil. If you can't measure those organisms that are doing these really important jobs for your plants, it's really hard to manage the growth, all the benefits that can happen to your plant, for your plant, by having this biology present in the soil. It's really, when you get down to it, it's really pretty simple to understand what to do next. You can be constantly checking and making sure everybody's still home. You want to check and make sure that the neighbors haven't applied a toxic chemical that drifted onto your property, and oops, all of your microorganisms are having a bad day. So if the microorganisms aren't being allowed to do their work, then your plant's not going to get the benefit either. And of course, I started studying this quite some time ago. In fact, my first introduction to a microscope was when my dad took me into the University of Minnesota to his laboratory in veterinary medicine, and he didn't quite know what you could do with a kid in a laboratory situation. Don't want to let me loose. So he set me down in front of a microscope and said, I'm going to teach you how to use this microscope. And spent some 20, 25 minutes with me, showing me how to use that microscope, handed me a Petri dish and said, count the E. coli. And I had the grandest time having fun looking at all the different critters in this Petri dish and counting them for my dad. I'm not sure if he took my counts or not, but it did kind of influence me for the rest of my life, because I found working on a microscope to be so enjoyable, and seeing all these secret creatures wandering around in the soil. We know less about the soil and about the organisms in soil than we do about the stars in the sky. Your bacteria in your soil look an awful lot like those stars spread across the night sky when we're counting them, but it's going to do you a whole lot more benefit to know what's going on with those bacteria. And then we also measure fungi and protozoa and nematodes and microarthropods. And so in college, I always really enjoyed the biology courses. So I have a double major in biology and chemistry at the undergraduate level. And then my master's work was done at Texas A&M in marine microbiology. And it's just unbelievable how much easier it is to do marine or freshwater microbiology, because you can see everything. There's no sand, silt, clay, rocks, pebbles, organic matter to get in the way. And when you start counting things in, when you're looking at soil, you've got to remember that there's a certain set of organisms that are on this layer of the organic matter, but how about the organic matter underside? Aren't there microorganisms down there? Yeah. And how do you count them? So figuring out all of these sorts of things is kind of important. And, it took me a while to develop a lot of these methods. So really started developing the methods at Texas A&M. I then went to Colorado State University for my PhD and started documenting, written procedures in the scientific literature on how you can look at all of these organisms in the same material, so that you're using exactly the same sample when you're going to be measuring your total inactive bacterial biomass, total inactive fungi, the protozoa, flagellates, and ciliates, the good guy nematodes and the bad guy nematodes, and learning how to identify all of that. And how do you know that these are bad guys and those are good guys? And so starting to come up with all of those characteristics. So we use all of this kind of information. We have to collect the data. We have to know all of this information to be able to say whether you're trying to grow plants in dirt or you're trying to grow your plants in soil. Now, do you have the proper balances of the bacteria and fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, earthworms, enchytraeids, all of those creatures? Do you have the right balances of all of those things in your soil to grow the plant that you want to grow? None of us want to grow weeds. So how do you prevent that? You have to get the biology right. So there's forms of nutrients that are produced by bacteria and fungi being eaten by protozoa, nematodes, micro, etc., are releasing the proper kinds of nitrogen. We don't want nitrate. We want ammonium if we're trying to get rid of the weeds in the system. There's been several papers now published from some Japanese researchers that I talked with briefly to discuss this idea. And then they've gone ahead and done the research showing that as you elevate NH4 in the soil, ammonium in the soil, you're going to reduce the amount of weeds because weeds require nitrate. So just, come join us, find out all about what we're doing in the school. And of course, we're always trying to stay on the cutting edge. So we're always talking about the most recent methodologies, the most recent discoveries. And so we invite you to come join us at the school. So just that brief overview, just getting you excited about all of this, I hope. So I will then turn it back over to Brian.
Excellent. And I'm excited. I'm already excited.
Good for you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. So now we're going to hand this over to Renald. So Renald, want to go ahead and just give a quick introduction and take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Elaine. Always nice to be on board. So my name is Renald. I'm running Fluorescent System, which is basically an entity, a company which is born after I actually have taken Elaine's beautiful online classes. For me, it has been a life-changing, because I was off from the private banking industry in Switzerland, and having worked with the Savory Institute guys for grazing, regenerative grazing, I suddenly asked myself the question as, well, everyone talks about soil, but very little people actually know what is that about. And boom, little genius went out of the lamp. Elaine was there, and then all the way now is history. That's 5 years I'm working on that company. Long story short, I'm going to introduce a little bit about that project that I run in Sweden a few years ago. This project actually helped as well to have some more, let's say, visibility on the market for people who are now more intrigued about what is. Everyone talks about soil health, however, very little people can make it tangible. And I may be a little biased, however, working with soil microbiology and the soil food web approach framework makes it some kind of rational enough for me, so we can monitor and then follow up on what this soil correlation is between soil microbiology and the crop that you actually grow. So in Sweden, I have been working along this company called 59 Degrees. This company owned by Joseph Carey has provided the compost tea brewer, and also the compost, the biocomplete compost necessary to make the soil amendment with the missing biology, because we're talking about that, right? Most agricultural systems are missing the microbiology for the simple reason that, well, the agricultural practices were not educated enough in the awareness that there is a correlation between soil microbiology and the crop that you grow. Basically, and empirically speaking, most farmers, and Brian can confirm, believe that by plowing you make your crop grow better, right? But then there is a whole cascading consequences that actually after a little while works against you. And then the missing link of this inverted trend was the soil microbiology. Anyway, we organized a little scientific experiment. Next slide, please. Brian, yeah, thank you. So what was that about? Basically, wanted to showcase that microbiology in itself function. And that very case was really interesting because, and we're going to see that on the later slide, the market gardeners there were already working on an organic setting, which means they were trying that as they could with the little knowledge that they had and had little problems. So this is when we entered. Basically, a few words about what these cases provide. Well, a few words like it's pretty cheap at market level, at market garden level, and it works on the first season, as my trial shows. So we could also witness beautiful yield increase the very first season. Can I have the next slide, please? So here, just giving a little bit of candy here for all of you. Well, the whole thing, like 8 crops has been tried, and on a very simple setting, which is a setting that you guys will do if we get to the consultant program, when you go to the final trial case. It just takes some common sense for you guys to think about. If you project already yourself there, you don't need to be Einstein to do this kind of project. You just need to be serious and use your mind and memory to organize it correctly. And then with all the tools that you will be provided, you will be able to come up with decent monitoring tools, the microbiology and the results. So here, the highlights are somehow impressive. The summaries, like we've been trying multiple scenarios. And now I'm going to come to who was involved more in detail. So next slide, please. And so myself, Flores system, just basically on a core offer as supporting farmers now to work their transition. And this is what maybe most of you guys may go if you don't go to the lab program and you go to certified consultant. The main market for you will be to support farmers to do this transition, because this is the key question. Everyone wants to go organic, and how? Well, this is where you will maybe able to help those farmers to transition their system with an actually strong support. So I was mentioning earlier, 59 degrees, owned by Joseph Curry. He has a background in tree care systems, and he has been using a soil food web approach for some time to help the local growers and municipalities to decrease their trees replanting death rate, if I may say. So then, you plant 100 trees and then you have 15% death or 20% death the first after planting, thanks to Joseph products, which is basically compost extract that you will maybe know about if you go ahead in the program, has helped most of those growers and municipalities to decrease their death rate to 5% on average. That was Joseph's number. So this is Joseph's kind of core business. On the other side, the market gardeners here, Kashamra, Mott, and Trogart. You can enjoy my beautiful Swedish accent here. However, so they are a young couple that has been focusing first on developing their market garden with the perspective of then opening their own restaurant. They now do. They had started with organic, with say non-chemical agriculture on their 1 hectare plot, but they had disease and low productivity. This is when 59 degrees and myself entered, and then we offered a soil regeneration program, which is, if we look at it from another perspective, the microbiological perspective, it is to create a system microbiologically adjusted, right? You can go organic, cool. However, if you don't know what you have in your soil to start with, you will tear your hairs apart, because you will try anything and you will read whatever the permaculture guy will say, and this he's going to say, and then the neighbor, and then the friend, and the whatever. And at the end of the day, you will not really feel any consistent progress, or at least have a tool strong enough so you can just monitor from where you started and where you're going, which is for me key. Monitoring is key, and what this program offers is about that. Anyway, next slide, please. We're going to talk about the problem. Yeah, so problem being, for me, with now a few years of experience down the line, I can say that it's not about the efficiency, about chemicals or synthetics or anything like that. It's about habits. It's about what we know and what we don't know. And in agriculture, as anything around it, people have been educated or told that chemicals are this magic key that makes your product grow. Most probably it helped sometime. I don't know on what basis it helped. However, today a lot of farmers are finding themselves stuck with a lower quality, higher diseases, and with all the lower organic matter in the soil. And then we can talk about carbon capture, carbon sequestration, water holding capacities, which is all what is the microbiology doing in your soil. So we had here we had a low productivity with a desire to go and stay organic. Next slide, please. What did we do? The proposed solution was absolutely to just bring this whole technology, because in soil microbiology, as a matter of fact, is a technology or a system in itself. Why do I talk about technology? It's because when Elaine was mentioning earlier the need of our soils to get some ammonium, NH4, it's kind of a equivalent of the farmer's mindset thinking only in NPK, right? So if there is on one side the synthetic technology, we have the biological, natural, microbiological technology, which is the soil food web. We need to know at least to bring to an optimal level of health, so to say, productivity, yields, or nutrient in the plants, etc., etc. So yes, you've heard Elaine mentioning weeds. This is what the soil food web does. It was the idea of bringing all the set of microbiology back, so we can increase all that by also restructuring the soil, right? And the whole conversation here, I'm not going to touch back later about why is the soil microbiology, the soil food web doing its job, and when it does. Anyway, so we have been putting that out. So the idea was to reduce the weeds, reduce the pathogens and insects, pests, and increase the plant productivity. So that's what we've done. Now, on the objective, next slide, please, Brian. Indeed, when we are looking at a farmer setting, the objectives are pretty clear. We have habits, as I was mentioning before. It's so easy to, go to your corner shop there and then buy a product by Bayer or Syngenta because it's written on the label that it's going to help you to increase this or kill that. And that's the problem, because by using that problem, those products, we also killing the microbiology, because by trusting the salesman, we engage our own ignorance, right? And then, of course, if we don't have anything to check, right, what have we done on our soil, such as our microscope? How can we know what we are actually do to our soil ecosystems? So down the line, of course, you guys have heard the basics of, water tables, pollution. This is also a massive problem when we know how important water is those days and how the commoditization of water is going on. Farming is a big stakeholder in that too. So as we try to reduce all those inorganic produce, stop to kill the same microbiology, which is indeed the one bringing your fertility, we will also enjoy some sideways and externalities, positive externalities, of also stopping to pollute the water that we, in the end, will end up in the sewage, and then to have this water recycled so we can drink it. Anyway, so what we do, we remediated that soil. That was the objectives. It's about providing something which is reproducible. You can do it again, right? You can do work with one client here, and the next day using the same framework, unless, the same framework, still adjusting to the client's context. It's always a context-specific approach. That then, on the second, as a consequence, grow high-quality food, right? Because we have heard about, organic food is the golden thing today because of nutrition. However, you can grow organic food with very poor soil microbiology, and the correlation with the same organic production nutrient holding in itself is very poor as well, right? Because of course the channeler, let's say the catalyst of these nutrients back to your plants, guess what it is? The soil microbiology. And using the microscope, of course, as this sacrosanct tool for having a pragmatic approach of proving what are we doing, right? So soil food web and the whole classes and steps that you take within this with soil food web schools will provide you the necessary cognitive framework, knowledge base, so to say. And you will be able then to be very soon autonomous on your own trial, and then down the line with your own clients, and then hopefully with beautiful results. And next slide, please, Brian. Going on, what is key about having a soil produce, and how do we make that? How does that resonate with what you're going to learn in these classes? It's pretty simple. We talk about aerobic versus anaerobic, right? Farming for decades and decades have been plowing the soil, and plowing the soil has been creating a destructuring of your soil capacity to enable air to infiltrate back into your soil, which means that as you plow, you create compaction, and as you create compaction, you decrease the level of air in your soil, decreasing your plant roots to go down, decreasing the capacity of the microorganism to be. And as you decrease those aerobic organisms to be, you also increase the other detrimental anaerobic organisms to be, which are detrimental to your plants, right? You will learn about that more in details. It's absolutely fascinating to see that, because looking at those two types of organisms, the one aerobic and the one anaerobic, helps you to figure out where your soil is at, which means what does your soil need in order to bring and to create the conditions so your soil microbiology can stay, but also your plant will be able to enjoy the microbiology work back up to what the physiological needs of the plant needs. So that's the key. A few little things about that, how to reach that. Basically, we have subsoiling, which is a key first step necessary. So figuring out if we have anaerobic conditions or not is a way to engage in the next step of remediation, which is about, shall I subsoil my parcel, my plot, or not, right? What are the conditions? How many of those nematodes, beneficial nematodes, are here? How many of those protozoans are here? Which gonna give us a snapshot of what needs to be done. Again, the framework that I'm using from Elaine's experience and the whole Soil Food Web School is key in enabling us to see where we are and to just be clear on the target. So, next slide, please. About the process now, I was just mentioning about that. Basically, we don't need to be Einstein to remediate soil, but having some decent or some common sense. Common sense topped up, I'd say, by, yes, the Soil Food Web knowledge base, which is necessary to understand what is going on. So you want to start first to see what your soil about, your soil or your client's soil about. Then from that on, you know where you are, and because through the school we also have a decent amount of data on successful trials, we also have now a very sharper idea as what are the proportions of this soil microbiology needed for the crop that you want to grow. For example, you will not need the same microbiology if you grow corn as if you want to grow an orchard of citrus, for example. The soil will need different proportions of the microbiology. Indeed, all this data we have and you will have in order to guide you for what you need to do to remediate your soil or your client's soil. Then the process when you run a trial, it's always create yourself scenarios like the normal scenario with no remediation and the one that you work where you have your amendments. Would you be just putting some compost tea, etc., etc., and then show that there is an actual reaction or consequence done affecting your system, your productive system. Now, next slide, please. We're going to talk about a little more into detail about what this experiment was about. So, three main scenarios: having a control scenario, which is, well, what would happen with nothing, which is current system. As in this scenario, with this trial, we had 59 degrees, as I mentioned earlier, providing the compost necessary for the compost teas and the compost extract. 59 degrees didn't have enough compost, so we could amend the plot receiving the trial. The detail on this trial is that has been done on the full garden to start with. We didn't do a quarter, a tenth of it. We did 1 hectare full, and I kept on the side a little part, which was the control. So we wanted to see if commercial compost, which means you want to understand that commercial compost has usually very little to see with biocomplete compost. Why? Because we don't know about what the methodology that has been used for them to provide the compost, but also we don't know what the resources they used for the compost making, which means, well, has they been creating beneficial conditions that would make this compost attract the good biology that we need back in our soils, or the other way around, which means you can actually have commercial compost, which is, I mean, let's be clear, which is good like shit, but anaerobic shit, which is what we don't want. Because if you start from a soil which is already bad, and you bring some supposedly good compost, which is not, back on your system, well, you're going to have created the good conditions so you will grow weeds and not your crops. So we wanted to figure out what was the actual reaction with this commercial compost, and third scenario, taking the same compost that we will use to amend all our system, but with a compost extract that we have been creating using 59 degrees biocomplete compost and compost tea brewer. So we would see a difference, right? And this is what we want to see on the next, on the few slides coming up. Next slide, please. That was one part of the scenario that we've created, and also to be sure that, not to be sure, because at first when you're a farmer and you hear, oh yeah, well, microbiology will help you decrease your weeds, it's like, oh, hallelujah, we have finally a solution, because you all know the main weed is like it's kind of a shadow lurking at you everywhere, and then everyone wants to fight those weeds, understanding the link between what happens in your soil, microbiology, and why those weeds come up, and maybe plowing at the same time, right? So we have set up this little experiment, again, using the same compost amendment and compost tea, and to see if there was an actual reaction about whether or not microbiology is actually decreasing the weed pressure or not, right? Very pragmatic, guys. So that's what we did. We kept the control. Then we used another similar control where we just inoculated compost extract. And then we did the same thing with just commercial compost, and another scenario with the same commercial compost inoculated, right? So that we have a kind of 4 sets of different scenarios that could guide us in understanding, is soil microbiology having an effect or not, which we're gonna see on the next slide, please. Talking about outcomes and results. So yeah, if I'm still in business today, it's because this works. Brian can confirm, Wes, Kiesha and Ernst can also confirm, and of course Elaine can confirm, even though you can say, sure, Elaine would always tell you it works because she's Elaine, but however, I would say that's 40 years of work. It works. So yes, it works. We have to make sure we create the right conditions, which is aerobic conditions, to enable your crop to perform. And this is one of the simplest ways to manage your agricultural system. Why simple? Because as much as you want to dig into agricultural science, you can get, it's the Pandora box, right? So then you enter, you find one thing, and another thing leads to another thing, And personally, I find soil microbiology robust and strong enough so I can rely on that as the key to create all rest. You can talk about enzymes, you can talk about diversity of bacteria, you can talk about carbon, you can label carbon against non-label carbon, etc., etc., etc. And then indeed, you have to find a way, right? One proxy which kind of simplifies your life somehow, enabling to monitor how your system is progressing, right? And so I'm going to now enter a little bit more of the details of the crops before, so next slide, please, before indeed showing some pictures. Basically, what is nice and interesting to see here is that the scenarios like on the crops themselves, see how a control versus the actual commercial compost only, which is scenario 2 on this table, shows that basically we have a lower yield, right? And this is very much anti-logic, I would say. Well, you put compost and there you go, it's magical, it grows. No, because this compost that we bought initially was average. So it was not providing anything special more that would enable our system to perform better. right? And I have checked, of course. I mean, I have a whole paper about this trial that you can find on my ResearchGate profile. I'm happy to provide it later if people want it, which is basically taking the whole framework in some kind of scientific jargon, but digestible. Anyway, it's saying here, coming back to these results, that if you have a poor soil and you put bad quality compost, well, you have worse results. That's what my trial showed. Now, not going into detail here, what is interesting is to see how the actual control scenario has been performing against the actually microbiologically adjusted plus commercial compost trial gone, and the results are pretty impressive. 72% on the average 8 crops, and we're going to look at it on detail later. I have used a pretty simple methodology of defining how many grams of edible or crops that have been grown per square meter. And we have some results like the Celeria, which shows 150% increase in the first season. So just wrapping that up, just focusing on the overall 72% increase in growth. I mean, for me, this is amazing. I have no farmer background, right? So then it's a beautiful number. However, if you just like now you divide this number by 2, an increase of 30% on 8 crops on average, it's already good, right? I mean, decent enough so you can just invest some of your time to just change your system, right? And this is key because we are talking about cost benefits. Farmers, like anyone else in the world, is pondering on the same way. What does that cost? What do I have, right? And this shows that there is a benefit. However, the trick is then tomorrow thinking about yourself in this position of being the consultant. Well, it will take as well as your capacity to convince and to understand the client context, the farmer's context, so you can get the idea of what is the benefit that they're going to have. Anyway, so not going too much more into details about those results. We're going to look at it later. I'm going to also talk, please, next slide, Brian, about the results on weed, the weed pressure. And then after that, we'll come back to some details about what seen on the crops. So what is interesting is like on using comparing the control scenario, which means nothing at all, and the same control with just inoculation on with the compost tea, we saw. We saw on both scenarios we saw a decrease. So 33% lower with the one scenario that has received compost amendments and the microbiology, and then 38% lower, which is, basically was a very empirical trial. Just like, put the compost, put the inoculant, don't, and then just at the end of the day, let that grow and just measure, cut, measure, and then you can see, very empirical. It has to be very empirical. It has to be very straightforward because, to be very straightforward and true, when you enter the agricultural world, or if you already are, you know that as we're talking about habits, it's very difficult to counter habits and beliefs, right? So being empirical about measuring, enabling yourself to have a control scenario always is what's going to save your results, right? Because you can say, right, look, this is your control. We did what you usually do, and this is what we offer. It's kind of your insurance, if I may say. Control is always the insurance. So next slide, please. Now just entering some more details about what was those results on some of the crops. We're going to look at cabbage, right? And again, what I was mentioning earlier, the very surprise to see that actually commercial only had a lower results than the control scenario itself, right? So, I mean, being pragmatic, like there was something that influences those crops, right? So what was that? Well, basically, if we look at the other solution, which is same compost with a beautiful compost tea or extract on that case, sorry, that was bringing the missing microbiology. You can look for yourself. I mean, visually, we have all the same scales on the three pictures here. You have a rolling measure on the side of the pictures. You can see it talks on its own, right? And then you can look into details, how much edible weight you have more on the microbiologic adjustment or not. However, this trial shows that yes, there is a difference. It's a positive benefit. So 126% increase on yield on cabbage, depending where you are in the world, can be a cash crop, right, on a market garden scale. But anyway, we're going to continue and look at other crops now. If we want to, next slide, please look at celeriac, which is one of those massive for us. That season has been an incredible increase, 149% here. Just making a side note for you guys, yes, we have the overall increase on the right, which is 149. It doesn't correspond to what you see under the pictures. Why? Because the number on the right measures the amount of celeriac produced on a square meter, right? It has been comparing square meters per square meters on the same crop. Here we're just looking at individual plants. And we can see, like, for example, I mean, look for yourself. I'm just taking the size of those plants just to start with is already talking for itself. We can look at the root systems of all those plants. They all have been planted in the same conditions. The soil has been prepared the same way. However, the approach microbiologically is different. Next slide, please. Talking now about the Fennel, which was also a very interesting one. Same approach. You can see that the commercial compost only provides equal results than the control. So that means, okay, you decided that you have invested, I don't know how many tons of compost, and you bring that back, but you don't know the quality of this compost, right? So you just believe that's going to make a difference. However, then you put that up in your soil and the result is the same. Of course, then you're going to go, oh yeah, you see, microbiological treatment or organic farming doesn't work. You see, now I'm giving myself a reason to use those chemicals again. True, right? So how can you counter those postures, those habit postures, if you don't have a microscope, if you cannot check your compost, if you cannot check your soil? How can you do that? Well, truth is you cannot. That's as simple as that. So just making a little come back to what this framework, the soil food web frameworks provides is gives you the tools so you can actually feel and be sure, monitor that what you're bringing back to your soil is valuable, right? Within the whole framework, with the whole philosophy behind it, of course. And these pictures shows it as simple as you can see, right? Commercial compost provides the same kind of yield, nearly the same kind of yield, but the same compost added with a microbiological inoculum that you will learn about during those courses, just double the yield. And that's just on Fennel. Next slide, please. We're going to look at less beautiful results. Onions here, we are keeping a positive, a better yield than the control scenario. However, it's also about here in onions, we harvested a little earlier because of the sake of finishing this trial. Sometimes you have to make trade-offs and decisions on that, and here we couldn't have the full onion ripe. Anyway, we are still having a decent increase in yield, same approach. Next slide, please. Now we're going to look at potatoes. Okay, someone tell me now here that these are not the same varieties, which I agree. But that was a surprise on my trial, right? However, the farmers have been focusing on having high yielding varieties. So those two varieties are supposedly being the high yielding. So we can accept that there is a kind of a relevance of the data which is showed here. And you can look here, the average square meter production, we increased by 40%. Same approach, very pragmatic. And the average unit is something else, right? What does that say? You know that potatoes, the way potatoes grows, okay, rhizomes type, if your soil is not structured well, your potatoes have a higher probability to be smaller, right? You are growing potatoes in a very compacted soil. Well, imagine yourself being in the side bed. If you are sleeping in a king or queen size bed, you're more at ease. You feel more comfortable. It's the same here. You can see the average unit weight. Well, it talks for itself, right? I mean, the full microbiological adjustment shows that the average unit is 5 times higher. Next slide, please. Talking now about rutabaga, and then later we'll be ending up on salads and Swiss chards. Same approach here. I can repeat on and on. Here on the rutabaga, what is interesting is, again, the soil structure. Rutabaga is kind of halfway in the soil and halfway out somehow. You can see that the total edible weight, which is the bulb of the rutabaga, is visually bigger. We can look at, it's nearly doubling the weight. We have reached 73% increase here as well. Next slide, please. Talking about salads, this is somehow interesting as well. You can look by yourself that the commercial compost provided just such a negative or dramatic non-results just by putting this compost out, right, which was of an average quality. And on the other side, you can look how beautiful this salad looks. The yields again on the right, 87% increase. Next slide, please. And the same, another approach on Swiss chards. Again, higher biomass, higher edible biomass. An interesting side here, which is most probably specific to the Swiss chard because of what Swiss chard need. What are the conditions of Swiss chard to super perform? Most probably this compost was bringing enough of what the Swiss chard was needing. Even though it was an average compost for the rest of the crops, for this time, it helped the Swiss chards grow better than the other one we've controlled with nothing. And of course, again, the whole soil food approach provide more than decent results. When you reach 63% increase on the first season, for me, if I'm a farmer, I buy that. Next slide, please. And this is where we end up. Talking about a little more, what happened after this trial. So I was mentioning all this trial helped really to have more visibility. I've started to appear on Elaine's website, and people in Europe have started to see me and then read my report and all that and wanted to work with me. And then today I'm working on what I believe is much needed is operational support farmers to make the transition to a fully organic system. You can say whatever you want. Most farmers will tell you, yes, I want, but very actually are take care enough so they can. So then, using this very pragmatic approach, while showing them and engaging with them, transitioning their systems is what they want. Because at the end of the day, they need to eat. If you're a farmer, you need to make money out of your crop. Transitioning a system would that be small scale or large scale? It's not the same thing. Today, I'm working at large scale. I'm engaging with large scale farmer. My current biggest project is on a 5,000 hectares farm in the north of Europe, where we are actually using exactly the same methodology, but we use bigger tools, like bigger machines, bigger sprayers, bigger tractors, bigger subsoilers, direct seeding, and all this kind of stuff that are a part of the combo. And this is it. So working large scale today, and also recently started a PhD to take all this framework back into the academic world, to maybe add an extra paper. There's so many paper in this world, to speak about what is applied, really applied soil microbiology technology, and how we transition a system. So that's it. Glad to have any question now.
Thank you, Renald. That was a fantastic summary of your project, and shows really through empirical data how much we can transform, especially that was within 1 year. Imagine, and we see the results year after year, how you continue to keep on increasing production, reducing weed pressure, reducing disease and pest, all that kind of good stuff. So Renald, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. Okay, we're going to move on to the Q&A section. And before we do so, before we answer your questions, we actually have a question for you. So I have a poll that I'm going to put out there, and we'll keep the poll up for just a few seconds, probably 20, 30 seconds. But we're just trying to get an understanding of what perspective are you coming into this from. And I'm going to go and launch the poll right now. And the poll is really asking, what best describes you as far as your perspective of this? Are you coming from a farmer, agriculture professional, or more from an environmental or environmental activist type of standpoint? Okay, we got almost half the people voted so far. We'll end it here in just a few seconds. All right, just a little bit more. We'll probably get to about 75%. I'll go ahead and stop it. So it looks like roughly around 69% farmer agriculture, about 31% environmental activists. And we've been doing these polls for quite some time, and that seems to be a very common average. So thank you very much for answering our question. Okay, so let me throw this back up here real quick. All right, so now we're going to get into the Q&A session, and what we're going to do here is take a look at some of your questions, and we'll get the panelists to be able to provide some feedback to this. So the first question is, I've heard Dr. Ingham, let me make sure I got it right here. I've heard Dr. Ingham and SFW consultants mention that the hard part of SFW is to make great compost. What are the challenges to making great biologically complete compost? Oh yeah, we've got some great answers for you here. And in fact, what I think I'll have is Kiesha and Casey, since they are very fantastic producers of biologically complete compost. Kiesha and Casey, you guys want to take the first crack at this?
Sure, I'll start. I would say the first thing is just really paying attention. When you're trying to make biologically complete compost, you need to focus on a lot of different aspects at once. You can't just kind of throw things in a pile, walk away, and just, let it decompose. We do things a little bit differently. So, it's a challenge to source good materials. It's a challenge to really always keep yourself on point, always be driving to have as much biodiversity as possible in your ingredients. And then, the microscope work, a lot of people, in the beginning, they'll really use the microscope a lot, and then eventually kind of, just trust the recipe and really you gotta use the microscope. So being diligent on really always checking moisture, always checking your smells, really looking at absolutely every part of the process, I would say, is the challenge. But making the compost itself, it's not so hard if you're a person who can pay attention to details. It's not rocket science. It's a simple process. You'll learn all about it at the school. They lay it out in a really simple way. Casey and I were able to transition from our hand turn piles into windrows really fairly easily. So it wasn't really a long learning curve for us.
Yeah, I would say that's you're hit it spot on, which is it's the recipe, it's the process, it's the attention to detail, and once you get those things kind of solidified, then it runs itself. You can make really good biocomplete compost, but it just takes a while to know those things. And again, the school's going to teach you how to do that. And I think also after a while you get an intuition as well. You use your microscope always to take, your results and get empirical evidence. But the smells, the feel, the look, all those things, you'll start going, oh yeah, compost is going bad, or no, that's shaping up to be really nice compost. Your intuition, you'll gain that for sure.
I guess I could say the hardest part about making compost is when you blow a pile and you can't sell it. Like that's sometimes what I'm saying. You made 150 yards of compost.
All that work.
No good. And so what do you do with it? You got to throw it back into the machine and back into the lot and recompost it. So
recompost. Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of pretty hard.
Yeah, it's not like you have to throw it out or burn it all or something. It's just you gotta have to do a little aeration, figure out what you did wrong, what was you get to play a detective and investigate to see what happened, so you won't ever make that mistake again. But you don't throw the organic matter out; you just add it to other piles.
Yeah. And I like what Kiesha had mentioned as well, that, they started small scale and went to large scale. And it is scalable. You can, make fantastic biologically complete compost with a small hand-turned pile that could be for your yard. And you can make thousands and thousands and thousands of yards of compost, biologically complete compost. So it's not like there's some limit to where you're like, oh, it's such a scale now I can't do it. That's not true. You can definitely make large scale compost biologically complete. And luckily, some of the compost producers, some of the large ones around in our area, are starting to go, there is a market for this. We are understanding there's a difference between compost, between non-biologically complete and biologically complete. So we're starting to see a lot more large scale producers thinking about this and starting to make changes to their operation. So it's great.
Well, yeah, I mean, some results like that from an old study, and it's like literally detrimental to put out bad compost and put out good compost. It's night and day, right?
I mean, let's be real. That's why we study our compost. Like Renald hit it right there on the head. Is you buy compost and then it kills your plants, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
Well, when I first started making compost and realizing that. We have to follow the rules that were really brought back with Sir Albert Howard when he returned from India. So he learned the temperature method. Made a lot of sense to me that we just had to get the right biology in the compost. And when you look at where compost is made in the municipal composting, municipal waste industry, they just put organic matter in a big pile. They might pile it up to 12 or 16 feet high. And, they wanted all that organic matter to go away. They wanted to go anaerobic. They want to blow off most of that carbon back into the atmosphere. Yeah, well, hello, climate change. So you can't compost that way if you want to make a product. And in the scientific literature of the time, when I first started going out and talking about here's what real compost is, 50% of probably at that time, almost 100% of the scientific articles that were written about compost said compost will kill your plant. And we've got to overcome that negative image of what compost is. They aren't composting. They're doing waste reduction. Totally different sets of requirements. They're trying to get rid of the volume of the organic matter, whereas we want to keep all of that organic matter. You don't want to be losing 80% of your pile to CO2 production. You want to keep all that 80% should stay in place. If you're losing half of your pile to, I don't know, sorry, I lost my, I'm sorry. I know. Sorry about that, everyone.
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, somebody called and I clicked the wrong button. So,
Whoops.
Whoopsie doo. Sorry. So, yeah. I I lost my train of thought, guys.
I think you're on the process of you don't want to blow off all of that good carbon. You want to be able to actually maintain as much as you can into that pile. Because it's going to be in the bodies of the fungi. It's going to be in the bodies of the humic acids and all that kind of good stuff. So, yeah.
Exactly. So we want to keep that 80%, maybe blow off no more than 20%. Huge difference in what you're selling.
Yeah. And it is a big difference, and something I struggle with my clients, because the general perception is compost, and for most of my clients, it's like, well, I'll just go buy the cheapest compost I can possibly find because they're really the same thing, and it's no. So you have to have a discussion about what really makes up good compost, and it's important because that's one of our main tools that we use to do our remediation work. So.
And that's why it's so great to have Renald's results, because it's right there. Look at what happens when you use the garbage that's made and called compost versus the real stuff where you've got the really good biology. So thank you very much, Renald, for your study.
Yeah, so much. Yes. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This question is from Kurt, and Kurt says, I'm in Kentucky. There are few practitioners, if any, in the soil food web. How do you begin breaking into the market and convincing farmers and communities to adopt the practices developing their soil food web? So I can start with this because I run into this problem. I mean, I live in California, which has a tremendous amount of agriculture, and you would think, okay, it's easy to break in, but the vast majority of the agriculture today is done in a very conventional sense, and their understanding, their education, and so forth is all wrapped around that kind of chemical complex. So it can be hard, but you're going to find some subset of farmers in your community that are upset with the conventional practices that they're doing, either because they don't want the chemicals, they feel it's harmful, and they have a kind of a moral objection to it, or an economical, which is more commonly, they're finding their production is slipping, their input costs are going up, they're getting the squeeze, and they're not as profitable as they want to be. So they're always looking for ways to be able to make that change. Those are the farmers you want to get engaged with. And the one way to do that is to go to grower groups. So there are usually in your area going to be organizations that are going to be relative to a particular type of cash crop or farming community, and they meet to discuss new technologies and just about challenges that they run into. And you can attend those and provide a 15-minute talk, a half hour or 1 hour, and talk about the soil food web. And you'll get clients that will be like, you know what, I think I want to try that. And with some of these clients, one of the best things I recommend is to do a trial. Show them with their own eyes by applying these practices what it can do. And it does two things for you. One, it shows them what they can achieve. But I think more importantly, it also helps them understand what management practices they need to change to do this type of farming. And you can do it in a small scale so that they can then wrap their minds around, how do I now make that transition and scale my entire operation? So that's my input. Anybody else want to jump in?
I would say focus on, just try to be sensitive to the experience of the farmer. The farmer is always trying to do the right thing. They, of course, do have their bottom line to think about, just as Brian is saying. And they look out there on the internet or wherever, and they see plenty of information that says, oh, this is going to save the earth. This is what we should be doing. This is somehow perhaps morally better or what have you. And the inference is, well, if you're not doing this, maybe you're kind of the bad guy. You kind of have to be sensitive to how some people can interpret things that are said out there, and just be sensitive again to the farmer's experience, what the farmer needs. And, Renald's presentation is a perfect example of demonstrating exactly what the farmer needs and how it can be achieved in a relatively short period of time, through much better than any method they've been shown so far. And that's right. Kind of the key.
Yeah,
and I
agree.
I always find that if you on your own property do demonstration plots where you've got half of that demonstration area, maybe it's half an acre or a quarter acre or a 10-foot by 10-foot plot, you still have that 10-foot by 10-foot plot of the chemical agriculture, and then you've got the biological agriculture. So you can compare the yields, and you can have field days on your own property where you let people come in and you show them around and they start getting real interested, or you put together a presentation where you take pictures of the results. You explain how you made the really good biology, what exactly you put on and when, and you go to grower groups. And, January is usually the time every grower group has their annual meeting. And you just, day after day after day, you're going to different grower groups, and it doesn't take long to develop a clientele that you're going to have more than enough work. The first year, you probably really don't want to take on more than 2 or 3 fairly large growers, 100 acres, 200 acres, something like that, because it gets pretty overwhelming. So, use the grower groups, use the agricultural conferences in your area to bring to the notice of the people at the conference what you can do and how to get hold of you to have you help them.
I would also mirror what Wes says. We're really lucky where we're at that we work with a lot of Brian's clients. So they'll come to our lot to pick up compost, and they're just always going on and on. What they love about Brian is that he meets them where they're at. If they want to use chemicals still, they do that. And it's been really fun over the years to watch them. You come in and get 1 tote of compost really skeptically, and then come back and get 5 totes of compost. And then, we need 5 yards. And I'm like, well, it must be working. that doesn't anymore. But, Brian wasn't hard on him. He let him come to his own decision, and does it with a lot of clients. And that wins him over, because it's not just smashing him out with, what we know to be true about biology.
Yeah.
And it is
one of those different. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's one of the things we teach in the online courses is, okay, how do you let your growers still go ahead and use some of the toxic chemicals? What does it do to the biology? So usually we're going to be saying something along the lines of, in the first year, have them do the control, which is their standard methods. But where you're going to start using the biology, reduce the inorganic fertilizers by 50%. And what they'll typically find out is they don't need to use those pesticides. They don't need the herbicides. They don't need all of those other things. And all of a sudden, come the end of the year, they realize they've saved, typically on a 300-acre farm, they've saved something, over $100,000 because they didn't pay as much for the inorganic fertilizers. They didn't pay for any of the toxic chemicals, the pesticides. They didn't have to till. They didn't have to try to deal with weeds by any other method. So they start realizing benefits. And so the second year, it's like, well, should we just back off some more on the inorganic fertilizers, or, maybe go cold turkey finally on the inorganic fertilizers, and now you've got them completely biological.
Exactly. One last thing I'll just mention is farmers in general, in my opinion, tend to be kind of I don't mean this so negatively, but a gossipy group, and kind of braggarts as well. Everybody wants to have the best yields, and they talk amongst themselves. And once one grower really starts to apply these practices and they are getting fantastic yields and they're reducing their costs, other growers start to pay attention. And I've had a number of clients that have come from just neighbors of my clients, seeing what my clients are doing. And it's like, okay. And so you could start to build your business that way as well. Just by finding the right farmer that's going to employ these practices, and then everybody else around in their area start going, oh, wow, I take notice and I want to do something similar to that. So, okay, let's move on to the next question. Next question is from Goran. And Goran says, question for presenters. It is obvious how much agricultural producers benefit from your consulting Soil Food Web. Can you please explain how you get paid by them? Do you arrange it before you start working? And do you split the profits from increased yields, or do you maybe get paid by the hour? Can you elaborate on this a little bit, please? Anybody want to take this?
We're looking at you, Brian. No, sorry, Kiesha. Sorry.
Well, it's all over the board. I've heard of a lot of different ways of going about it. I mean, sometimes, for the first project, you're going to just, donate your efforts and time to make certain that you have a really good case, like Renald does. I think the idea of splitting the increase in profit is great, although I've never got to do it, but I think that's a great idea. And then just, having contracts in the beginning and giving people an idea of what it's going to cost and working that way is another way a lot of people do it. Brian's probably got the most experience here along with Elaine to talk about the answer to this question. But
Sure. I agree with you in the splitting yields. I've never had that opportunity. Nobody's ever offered it to me, or I've never accepted doing something like that. So for me, it's been typically I get paid by the hour. But what I find is the most successful is you meet with your client, you assess their operation, you talk about goals and objectives and those types of things. And that might be a small consulting fee in its own that you negotiate out with that client ahead of time frame. But typically, then I'll provide a proposal. We'll say, all right, this is what we talked about, what you're trying to do, and this is how much work it should take. And it's an estimate of cost is what I usually put it into place. And it's for a lot of clients, it's year 1, year 2, and year 3, because you want to be able to show that, yes, year 1 might be, some larger costs because we're in this transition. There's equipment that you may need to buy. There's some intensive work that we need to do to change your management practices and those types of things. But years 2 and year 3, we should have a lower estimated cost. And the proposal tends to work very well because it helps them budget as well. And what typically happens too, I'll provide a proposal, and let's say it doesn't quite match with their budget that they wanted to plan. So we'll start to remove things off the proposal, but when you do that, you have to reset expectations, and you go through this negotiation with your clients. In larger scale clients, there's more at stake. With small scale clients, sometimes the negotiation is just simply a phone call. We work out the details, and it's going to be, all right, I'm going to go make a tea. I'm going to spray it on your property. This is what the cost is going to be. So it can be very small, easy, quick, to very large, complex types of proposals. Anybody else want to make a comment to that?
Yeah, I can share my experience at large scale. The trial I'm making at the moment is on 60 hectares. And for me, a way to enter a price was as well taking into account how much the farmer would spend in inorganic fertilizers and the whole cocktail, which means, well, you're going to spend that much. Well, on that trial, you're going to save that much because we don't use that, right? So I should take that part, right, at least. And then another, you can mix it up with, what a normal agronomist consulting fee would take if you just come on the property for 1 day or 2 or 3, depending if you just do microscope work or operational assessment. That's also a thing that I've been using.
Yeah, I think the point is there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and you find out what your client is expecting as well. And I think at the end of the day, it's just good communication. Have good regular communication, set expectations correctly, and you'll have successful consultations.
And we include a lot of this in the online classes, where we talk about dealing with a client, dealing with different ways of getting paid for what you're doing. There's not just one way. You have to talk with your potential clients and find out what they're willing to do. Paying you in the inorganic fertilizers that they didn't use, so that money coming to them, or yields at the end of the year. The only time I have ever had people do we'll get 10% of the yield, or the money that they make from the increased yield. I've only had that ever be brought up as a possibility with really big growers, where we're dealing with people who are farming, 30, 40,000 hectares. So it tends to be a larger scale approach to doing things. But in the case where we reduced the grower, or we reduced his inorganic fertilizers and pesticides 100% gone, inorganic fertilizer 50% less, and then the increase in yield was on their normal corn stalks, they got usually one ear of corn per stalk, sometimes 2, but where we put the biology, they were making between 3 to 5 ears of corn, all the same size, And so, the payment from that one was, well, I think they said, if I remember correctly, they had increased their yields by $3 million. Give me 20% of that and I'm going to be a happy camper.
Exactly. Yeah. If you structure right, yeah, it could be a good windfall for sure. Yeah.
Yep. And they don't mind so much because they didn't expect to make that money. So
Exactly.
they're paying you out of the improvement.
Right. Yep. Okay, let's move to another question from Denise. Denise asks, Richard Perkins, a market gardener also in Sweden, shows how to make a fermented anaerobic tea on his website. Would you ever recommend this? Anybody want to take this one?
This is my oh my. Well, the anaerobic tea, what's actually in that anaerobic tea? It's typically going to have a very low pH because anaerobic organisms will produce those low pH organic acids, things like acetic acid, butyric acid. They're all fairly smelly. The alcohols that are being produced under anaerobic conditions. So what's the effect of spraying your soil or your plants with something that has really low pH, has a lot of those low pH organic acids? Well, what do we use those kinds of organic acids for? They're all preservatives. If you want to make, what is it, where you put your hay silage? There we
Silage.
go. Yep. Yeah, the brain just takes a while to function a little longer. So when you want to store your green hay, you add an anaerobic inoculum, or you put it in the ground and you get that material to go anaerobic because that's a preservative. When you're making a lot of the Southeast Asian, cabbage, where they put the cabbage in a pot, bury it in the ground for 6 to 9 months, dig it up, and like most Westerners kind of go, nope, can't eat that stuff because the smell is not so great. It's preserved cabbage material, but it's the preservative quality. So if you add something that has a really low pH, it's going to do a good job of preserving things. But we're going to actually be killing a lot of organisms in the soil. So if you use these low pH anaerobic organic acid materials to apply to plants that have a disease, obviously that soil around that plant doesn't have any good biology in it, or your plant wouldn't have been attacked by that disease-causing organism. So what are you trying to get rid of? That toxic organism, that disease-causing organism. And so applying an anaerobic tea could really do the job quite nicely for you. It's just that now you're going to have to come back in maybe a week to 2 weeks later, after all the disease is killed, after all of that problem has been dealt with by the anaerobic conditions, and now you're going to have to re-inoculate all the beneficial organisms. All those aerobes have to be put back in. Because if you just kill everything or kill most everything, what's going to come back? It's going to be the diseases, it's going to be the pests, and they're going to be way worse than what you had before. So you've got to think about this logically. Why are you applying an anaerobic tea? It's for those kinds of purposes. But then to not lose whatever crop you've got left over, you're going to have to get that good biology back into the system very fast.
Yeah, I guess that's the same. I look at it as a potential tool in a toolbox, not a tool that I would go to very often. And it's focusing on the soil food web principles. Nutrient cycling with aerobic organisms is really the way to go. And you might use this tool, but like you said, you got to come back and make sure those organisms are put back into that system to get that nutrient cycling kicked off again.
A lot of our clients are using, there's so many different methods out there right now for, producing indigenous microorganisms or Korean natural farming or anaerobic teas. And not to naysay everything, but I just try to point to, use your microscope on all these. It's, these are all tools that, could possibly work. And that's what's cool about what the school teaches you is you've got that power now to use your microscope, to look at the soil, to track the data like Renald did. A lot of the times, these things that are coming out about, this method is really good. That's just observational data. And I've learned myself when I'm actually writing everything down and keeping track of things, my eyes are sometimes more off base than my brain thinks they are. And so, sometimes it's good to ask people to see the data and see where they're coming to these conclusions from. Yeah.
Agreed.
I can add something here.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've have some friend who went to Perkins Farm in Sweden, and I mean, we can criticize Richard's business model with his farm and etc. However, being very pragmatic, I would ask Richard, can you show us the data? I mean, you've applied your tea, your anaerobic whatever, okay, on what? What was your soil about? What was the improvement? On what crops? For how many years? That's beautiful. I mean, it's a bit of being so pragmatic, and this is what Kiesha says, take your microscope and have a look, right? At least through the whole framework that we all work on. Well, you know where you start and you know where you're going, because you are the same eyes looking at the evolution from point A to point B. That's my take.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I think some of the practitioners of this too, they may already have, let's say, good aerobic soils. They got the right biology, and they may be using these products in a very minor amount to get either some disease suppression or some minor fertilization out of it, whatever it is. But in such small quantities, it's not doing harm, and the biology recovers quickly. But other people might look and say, well, that's good, but maybe twice as much is better, or 4 times as much is fantastic. I'm going to go 10 times the amount, right?
Yeah.
And now you run into problems just because you don't understand the mechanism that's happening there. So,
yeah. Elaine calls that the moron mentality.
Yes.
All right.
Put moron and moron and
moron.
You a moron farmer.
Exactly. Okay. Next question is from Dina. And Dina says, integrated weed control is very needed since most regenerative farmers do it by hand. Glad to hear there are breakthroughs by increasing ammonia. What is an optimal size of crop, land, or lawn so that it's cost effective for the client? I'm trying to understand a business case from a client perspective. 1, they hire a soil consultant, and 2, then buy into biological improvement / solution.
Especially for small scale people, probably what you want to find is a landscape company that applies biological solutions. So that, they're making the extracts, they're making the compost, the teas, and they come out and for very little cost, relatively speaking, per lawn or per plot of land, they apply. And so you just have to pay, the typical landscaper fee. If you don't really want to follow that model, then you're going to want to look at the scale of compost tea that you actually have to be making, or compost extract. Making small piles of compost, probably only going to have to make compost once a year. If all you're doing is putting it on your 100-foot by 100-foot lot, which has your house sitting in the middle of it. So you don't need that much of any of these materials. So yeah, it's not that expensive. It's just that you've got a learning curve that you're going to have to come and take the classes, or figure out a way to understand what you're doing with the compost and the extracts and the teas, and when they should be applied, and when they should be going after different kinds of insect pests and things like that.
Yeah. And I think Renald hit it too in his presentation, where he talked about, the proportions, the ratios. And, when we look at plant succession, early interstitial plants tend to be weeds, and they require a different proportion of bacteria to fungi in the soil. And so once you start to understand those mechanisms, then as you start to move your soil to a different biological ratio, then the weeds have less of the food sources they need. They become outcompeted. They become weak and spindly and so forth. Weeding becomes easier. There's some weeds that just they hold onto the soil like crazy, and they're hard to pull out. Once you start building good structure in your soil and you're changing it to more later successional soils, the weeds you can just pull them and they just come right out. I mean, it's super easy. They can't leave their roots in the ground and things like that. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to add?
And one comment, I think, in this question, they said all you have to do is increase ammonia. No, ammonia is anaerobic gas that's released only under anaerobic conditions by some not very pleasant bacteria. So no, we don't want ammonia. It's ammonium. What's the difference between ammonium and ammonia? Ammonia is NH3, and man, you can smell that stuff. Ammonium is in the soil, and that it's not volatile. So it's going to remain in the soil until it's taken up by somebody. Okay?
Chemistry is amazing. Add one more hydrogen. Voila, it's a totally different thing.
Yep.
All right, anybody else want to add to this one before we move on to the next question? Okay. We have a question from Sarah, and Sarah asked, hello, how does bushfire affect the soil biology, and can these techniques be used to rehabilitate land after a fire in an alpine wilderness habitat? Boy, us in California have got some experience with that.
I'll take that one.
Go for it, Kiesha.
Yeah, that's a question for us. Actually, we live in Northern California, and it's just been crazy fires this season. I mean, I can't tell you how many people we know, how many customers we have, how many friends
plus ourselves
have
lost their property to this type of fire. And it absolutely is a way to bring everything back. Interestingly enough, we often set up first before we go and help these people regenerate. We volunteer all the time to do these camps where we bring people in, we teach them about biology, we teach them about toxic remediation, we use compost for all of that. And we'll bring our microscopes and we'll set up a booth, and people will bring soil samples from there, from a bit under the ash layer, and there's still microorganisms there. And it's like, in some of these very, very hot fires, it's burning more of the soil than would normally be burnt. And really what you can do is just come in and provide some organic material, put some microorganisms in there via extract or compost tea, and you see things start to regenerate fairly quickly. And I mean, beyond just regenerating the soil, it's a great way to bind up toxins that are going to come off your burn sites, where your houses are, where your vehicles are, where there's really, really nasty toxic stuff that's flowing on the surface with the rainwater. You can use compost and wood chips and microorganisms to bind these toxins up, hold them in place so they can be taken off the site. So actually, sorry.
No, I think it was
yeah, I mean, it's just an excellent way to deal with these issues. And we're really, really, really looking into what it'll take to get into these large forest areas and just helicopter tea the whole place. So it's a perfect use for microorganisms. It really, really is.
I want to use drones.
Yes.
I want 200 drones.
I want to see the drones.
The fires, and that's, there's all this fire ecology that goes on. And like Kiesha was mentioning, there's a difference between cold fires and hot fires. Unfortunately, with a lot of fire suppression we've done, we've created these scenarios where we have really, really hot fires. And soil's very insulative. But when you get really hot fires, that insulation only lasts so long. And so you are damaging, through that profile. I think, fire can actually be a good thing. I know in California, the Native Americans would use fire quite regularly to manage the landscapes to a very successful degree. So yes, fire can be a good thing, but fire can also be a bad thing. You just need to understand what the differences are. Anybody else want to make a comment? Okay, we're going to go to a question from Sean, and Sean said, how are you applying the microbial inoculant? I think, Renald, that's probably a question to you, because I think this is a little bit based upon the your presentation. So, Renald, do you want to take the first crack at this?
Sure. Sean, within the context that we had, the 59 Degrees company owned by Joseph Carey, he had put together a compost tea brewer on a trailer, which means, well, we create aerobic conditions so we can extract all the microbiology from the compost, which is biologically complete. And on the same trailer, had a setup with a little pump and a hose with a few tens of meters long. And then we just had to move the trailer with a pump with a battery. We would just inoculate the whole plot, right? So then you would ask me, well, at what rate? Well, we knew that the tank was that much liters and we had that much land, and we had to be sure, like empirically speaking, that we would spread that much liters on that much amount of land. And we had a ratio which would correspond to a reproducible methodology. That's one way. Applying now at large scale, you have this beautiful machine called sprayers. Well, you can spray as much as 6,000 liters at a time. Maybe some sprayers spreads more. Well, you fill 6,000 liters of beautiful tea, and then you adjust your rate with the speed of the sprayer, and there you go. Your microbiology is out. Of course, there's a few little details to be fixed before, but that's another conversation. Yeah. So yeah, there's many ways. Pretty easy, and humans are creative, so you always find a way.
That's for sure. Every farmer seems to have a different set of equipment or tools they want to repurpose it. But what about using this? Oh, good idea. Let's take a look at it. And I tell you what, your microscope will tell you the truth. Is the sprayer that they're using good or bad for the biology that you're trying to apply? So, yeah, use your microscope, use your microscope, use your microscope. Anybody else want to add to this?
So we can spray things out, especially if you're trying to get up into the foliage. You want to make tea, because the tea, the organisms are growing and they're making glues that will instantly stick them to the surfaces of the leaves or the branches or the fruit or the flowers, whatever, and provide that protective barrier against diseases and pests. So, spraying above ground, that is definitely something that you want to do maybe 2-3 times, especially in that springtime growing period where you're going to get a lot of potential attacks. With the soil, it's going to be more of the extract, where you're going to extract the organisms from the compost and then apply that liquid to the surface of the soil. If you have to be getting down to the roots, now you're going to use an injector, which are typically, like a probe that you push into the ground and then you pump the compost extract into the soil. And so, when you get to the bottom of your pushing that injector into the soil, then you start the supply of liquid coming out, and all the time you're pulling that metal rod back out of the soil. You're pumping the compost extract organisms into the ground. And again, like Renald was talking about, you want to, how many liters are going in or how many gallons are going in. And so you want to watch that drop in your tank as you're injecting at every spot as you go along. Now there are some more fancy injectors that you can drive along, and the injectors go in on opposite sides of the roads. But those are haven't been around as long, so we're still kind of looking at them about how long are they going to last, because there's lots of moving parts on those kinds of machines. Injection. And then I think another way that we have to start considering is drones. Certainly, if you come out with a helicopter, you can get done spraying a very large operation. Can get completely covered very rapidly when you're using a helicopter. So, an hour to cover all the property that you've got. So lots of different ways to apply things.
So many different ways, yeah.
I want to add on what you said, Brian and Elaine. I have a client in Austria. So he had a compaction problem to start with. He had to subsoil. So what he did on our consultation and work together is like he retrofitted a subsoiler on which he put a whole networks of pipes going down to on the profile of the T-shank for subsoiling that he plugged to a tank in the front filled with beautiful compost extract. And as he was subsoiling, he was in the same time inoculating at the depths he wanted. That client had is producing corn silage, and the first year had 20% increase. He measured it himself, right? So farmers are creative, handy, do-it-yourself jobs, no doubt. So fun.
Yep. There are at least two different kinds of farmers. They're the ones that want to do it all themselves, keep the price tag low, and they enjoy making new equipment. The other end, you got farmers that they just want to have you come out and do it, and they will pay you to come out and do it. And so what kind of farmer are you dealing with? Well, right from the first question answer, you got to talk to your farmer and find out what they want.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you. And that's so true. There are some that are like, I have all this equipment. I want to reuse it, and they will figure out a way to do it. And I love working with those kind of farmers too, because boy, they're so creative. And it's like, I didn't think that would work, but boy, you got it to work. I'm bravo. Okay, well, we got time for, I think, one question, and it was a really quick question, and this question is specifically for Renald, and this one's from Christopher. And Christopher says, a question for Renald. In your experience so far, what was the hardest part of becoming a soil food web consultant?
The hardest
Tough one, right? You're thinking easy question, but no, actually.
The hardest part... It came after. I mean, with the results I had, I could add some interest, and large-scale farmer was starting to be ready to work, and then finding a price tag which was okay, blah, blah, blah. The hardest part has been to actually face the habits of these, synthetic prophylactics chemicals, this mindset, right, to constantly address, right, because when you come in and you have to, defend, advocate, and then constantly explain, you're facing another world which is coming from another education, another mindset of, you don't know, you nuke, that's it, destroy. And this constant, energy to put out to repeat and say blah, 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 and then, okay, protozoan this and nematodes this and da, 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 da. And then also facing questions like if I put that much of nematodes and that much of protozoan and that much of bacteria, how much will I have as a yield? And that's kind of very difficult to answer, I have to say. Mm-hmm. So backing up sometimes to very, very bold postures, like had to raise my voice and say, you have to trust me now. I'm not challenging you on your NPK approach, so please don't challenge me on that. And we're going to look, we're doing a trial together, and that's it. That's going to talk for itself. But then you have to provide results, yeah? So that was kind of the hardest for me so far. Yeah, and I got to say, because now I'm working at large scale, I was saying, and, using those big machines, you adding up a lot of extra constraints within the whole supply chain when you're deploying the whole soil regeneration thing, which complexify the job. So you have to understand how a sprayer functions, how a subsoiler functions, how a direct seeder functions, and then you add up the cover crops, and then you can go to agroforestry if you want. So yeah, hard. I don't really know, but challenges. Yes, you have to be ready. You have to be ready. That's my take.
And I usually found that you had to be, when they were going to spray something, or they were going to inject, or they were going to, go down put the plants into the field, either seed or as starts. When they're tilling out that, plowing out that furrow, and they're going to drop liquid with really good biology in it into that furrow, you got to be standing there watching. So that everything is getting done correctly.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you have to be the person on the tractor, but it does mean you're going to have to be there to make certain they're doing it right.
Correct.
Certainly in the first year.
Accountable.
Yep.
Why didn't it grow? Well, I don't know. I have to go back now because I wasn't there. I'm not sure. How did it actually work? Did they put enough extract into the system or not? Yeah. That's for sure.
It's the cases where they're going in and we're getting biology started really good even before there's any plants in, and then they go in and plant the little seedlings, and the seedlings start growing, and we're applying like 3 applications of compost tea, each application 1 month apart, and the biology in the soil is taken off. It's just beautiful, and you can show the grower the increases in growth rates as the biology has gotten more and more to what we want it to be. And then the next time you come back and there's no biology in the soil, it's gone. It's just completely wiped out. And so you say to the grower, what did you do? And the grower goes, I didn't do anything, nothing. Don't blame me. And it's like, well, okay, then who came out and peed all over your property without you knowing? Well, it's the neighbors next door. Well, no, they haven't applied anything. What happened? And you finally go back to their records and you go, well, okay, what's this stuff called glyphosate? And well, we know that these weeds come up at this time of year, and we have to get out there and spray beforehand so those weeds won't be a problem. And you kind of look at them and go, so what does glyphosate do to the biology in the soil? And this light, this horrified look comes across the grower's face, and like, oh no.
Oh, whoops.
I did it to myself.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't worry, we'll fix it. All we have to do is come out. It's just
the school hard knocks. Yep.
Yeah, it's a tough way to learn those lessons, but sometimes that's all you can do is let them learn those lessons, and then hope that you can get through the wall of it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. Okay, well, we had a fantastic set of questions. I'd like to thank Kiesha and Casey and Wes for being on the panel, providing good insight and feedback. Renald, thank you so much for your presentation.
You so
Your data was awesome. It's such a good example of how to properly go about doing an experiment and to show it to your farmers. And Elaine, thank you for everything that you do. I mean, you've really set us all on this course and this path. So
I'm all to blame. And thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sammy and Luke.
No problem. Oh, thank you. Sammy and Luke have been moderating and running the scenes behind the scenes. Gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot you guys. You guys keep us on track. Yes, thank you.
Sammy will make sure you remember.
Exactly.
Just got to tease you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, everybody, and hope to see you guys at the Soil Food Web School.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Was that the